I just love this stuff. You have to be mad, you have to be nuts to do all this stuff. And I'm proud to say we're all nuts.
Hey, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. We've got something really special for you today. We're sitting down with Uli Behringer. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. We've got Brendan Murphy, Senior Sales Engineer. We've got Daniel Fisher, Synth Expert, Extreme Synth Expert maybe. But we want to sit down and actually get to know you a little bit. Talk about your life's journey and how things have developed. I was fascinated when I was reading a little bit about you that your father was a nuclear physicist, but also a church organist.
That's
Your
right.
mother was an interpreter, also into music. You had aunts, uncles in music, so you really come from a musical background.
Music was everywhere in the house.
Yeah.
You're right, my father was one of those mad scientists. He was a nuclear physicist. He was also a church organ player, and he lived and breathed and loved his pipe organ that he built. My mom was a simultaneous interpreter. She was a teacher, and she was also a pianist, so we had music the whole time.
Yeah.
My uncle was a composition professor, and my aunt was an opera singer, so I grew up with music and electronics, so I guess I had no choice.
No choice at all, yeah. Is it true that your father bought a church organ, a pipe organ, and installed it into your house?
Well, he bought a pipe organ, and you may know that in these days, church organs were built with pneumatics or with mechanical control. And so he bought the pipe organ with 1,200 pipes.
Wow.
And he electrified it. So that was the days, 1960 something, where transistors came out. So he bought these transistors from the UK and sorted them out on his dining table. And he basically was the first in the world who built an electronically controlled pipe organ.
Wow.
He got multiple patents on it, and this organ was his life to the very last breath he took. And I was a little boy. He could look over his shoulder, and he taught me electronics, and he allowed me to help him a little bit. And I think that was one of the most influential times in my life.
Mm-hmm. And you started playing piano very young.
Yes, obviously, as I said, no choice. I was 4 years old, and my mom, being an incredible teacher, she knew how to got me to play piano by feeding me a grape for every scale I played.
Ah.
So positive reinforcement. Yes, I started at the age of 4, typical classical education. And later I went to the university, started classical piano, and then one day I was invited to the jazz festival in Montreux, and that's when I lost it. It was the day when Al Jarreau was on stage, and I got the jazz bug, and I started to play jazz.
Mm-hmm. Nice, nice. So you were originally from Switzerland, but you had gone to a university in Germany.
That's correct. As far as I remember, I'm still Swiss, but that's long ago. Yeah, I studied sound engineering because that was the only university that taught sound engineering, and I went to the Robert Schumann Institute to study classical piano. And that's where we had a little recording studio. We had 100 students and 2 microphones, an old Telefunken recording machine, and I think it was an 8-channel Telefunken mixing console. 4 channels were always out of business.
Of course.
so you had 4 channels. And the real problem at the time was actually that you had to queue up, you have to book the room, wait 3 months, and if you were lucky, you got the room. But I said to myself, how do I ever become a recording engineer if I can't practice, right? And that was the beginning when I said, I need to have my own recording studio. So I turned my living room into a recording studio, set up with the acoustic shielding and the tables. And the plan was to build a recording studio. But then I said, how do I get equipment? And I was not able to afford it because I was a struggling musician. So I started to build equipment for myself. And all my friends came, hey, Uli, if you built that stuff, why don't you make me a compressor or a mixing console as well? And so I gave it to my friends for basically nothing because it was never meant to be a business. And I made a lot of my friends happy.
I bet. Yeah, I bet. That's fantastic. So were you doing recording of your own music, or were you working with bands, or what were you doing with the studio in those days?
Interesting, the studio never got finished. It soon became a production facility.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably a lousy sound engineer, but I started to develop products. More and more friends came and said, hey, the stuff sounds great. Can you help me as well? And then I said, well, there must be a lot of people who have the same problem. So I advertised in little classified ads, if you still remember what that is. And I started basically turn my so-called studio into a manufacturing facility. And the rest is history.
Wow, how about that? You had actually built some equipment before. When was the first synthesizer that you built?
Well, that's an interesting story. So I grew up in the 80s when all the beautiful synthesizers came to life with the Junos, the Jupiters, the 909s. And we had a little music shop next door. Every available minute, I was in that store playing the stuff. And I grew up with the synthesizers. And I remember one of my friends called me and said, there's a recording studio who will get the first Prophet 5. And we went there, and I was totally smitten by the sound of that product. And I went to my dad and said, I need 7,000 Swiss francs, would you mind? Right? And you can imagine that you're out of your mind, right? But what happened later is I spent so much time in that store. One day the owner said, you know what? You're never going to buy anything anyway. Get the hell out of my store. And that was actually very traumatic for me, because I realized if you don't have money, you're screwed. My dad was kind enough to say, you know, I'm not going to buy you a synthesizer, but I'm going to help you build a synthesizer. So I was about 16 years old, and I built my first synthesizer. Nothing great by today's standards, but I put so many hours into it, and they were like do-it-yourself magazines, and I picked some circuitries here and there. I had an old EKO organ, if you still remember that brand. So I took the key bed out of it and some knobs. And so that was my first encounter of building my own synthesizer. And what it really did is it helped me to learn electronics. And if my dad just had bought me a synthesizer, I probably would have never developed the same passion. Right? Necessity is the mother of all innovation, right? It had an electric piano built in. It was an organ. And I had a synthesizer, and I played in 3 bands, so I could carry this thing around. And depending on the music we played, I had everything set up. Unfortunately, I lost it. It was
oh no!
Yeah, someone threw it away as we moved offices. It hurts me to this day. But many years later, Pete Sadler, the brand leader of Midas, whom I told the story, he said, actually didn't say anything, but he felt that it hurt me that this thing was lost. And secretly, he built a synthesizer, which later became the DeepMind. That's a story you probably never heard. And so he was never meant to be sold. He basically built that product for me.
Wow.
To give me a gift. And later on, obviously, became a wildly successful synthesizer.
Right, wow.
But that's a little bit the journey of my introduction to synthesizers.
Right, and I know you've spent time with the DeepMind. You guys have definitely dug into that as well. I mean, that's a pretty nice gift.
There's a lot of love, sweat and tears into that thing.
Right.
That sparked the whole journey of bringing synthesizers back, and probably it evoked the same emotions that I had when I was in that music store, that I could not afford these products. And I made it a mission, we made it a mission to bring these products back and give it to people like me at that time who couldn't afford products.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I can tell you that in many cases, we build synthesizers, there is no commercial incentive behind it. In some cases, if we even lose money, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But perhaps my gift to the musicians is to make these synthesizers affordable, because you know how many people love the old synths, and something I totally enjoy. And for me, it's almost like a 360, right, where I started and coming back. And
yeah, of course, we're surrounded by all the fantastic things. It's so cool.
I just love this stuff.
Yeah.
You have to be mad. You have to be nuts to do all this stuff. And
right.
I'm proud to say we're all nuts.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. I have to ask you about one more story before, and then we'll let these guys chime in as well. But I really like the story of your mentor and his daughter and the logo.
I was dating a beautiful girl in those days when I was studying in Germany. And her father was a guy by the name Otto Panke. and he was running a chocolate or candy factory. He was a marketing genius, right? So whenever I visited their house, he took me aside. We went to these walks in the forest and said, "So, my son, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I have this great idea. I want to build a company and build products." And he said, "Well, let me teach you a few things, right? First of all, don't buy a big car. Save the money, right? And reinvest it in your business. And what makes you different, right? Find a distinguishing factor." And I said, "Well, I told he knew I had a perfect pitch." And I said, "We're going to create a story that your equipment sounds different. So how do we demonstrate this? How do we illustrate this? Take your ear." So he called his graphic designer, "Draw this young man here a logo," and then we put a triangle around it, and that's basically the story. And I really owe this man a lot. He was a great mentor, and I'm sure you have mentors in your life. They're so important in life, right? Especially when you start something and a question, I had no idea how to run a business, right?
Right.
And whenever I had a question, I asked him. At some point, I probably was more important to visit him than his daughter.
But she later helped you redesign the logo a little bit as well.
Yes, that's right. Anna, which I'm still in touch with today. She's a wonderful lady and a great singer, by the way. I actually went to see her and I told her the story, and they said, "You know what, that logo looks a little bit outdated." And she's a marketing expert as well. I said, "We need to simplify that," and so she helped me redefine that. So there's another 360.
I love that story. I love that. That's so cool. Daniel, what have you always wanted to ask Uli?
Not ask so much, but just thank for a lot of these things that have come out. I come from the same area. I'm going to be 63, so I'm right there with you. And so, when I started Synthesis, each of these things kind of came out one at a time, and I got to learn what this was and what that was.
Right.
Soon as I started getting in the industry, I was working at Kurzweil back in early 90s. But then all of a sudden the synths went from a knob for every function to a data slider and a 2-segment LED. And I think we lost a generation of budding synthesis then, because you could never experience what turning resonance and cutoff at the same time is, or the envelope depth and resonance at the same time, or anything just like this. And instead it was, where am I mousing to? And you lost that. And in particular, the System 55, and that was back in 1980.
Right.
And only every once in a while when they would bring one here, I would go and play again. But when I saw that, it was like, not only could I afford one, but I could put it somewhere. I couldn't put, it would take a team of 4 people who might drop a System 55. But I could get that from one, it breaks into 2 pieces. I could get that from one room to another. But everything that I got to try back in 1980, people can try again. You can experiment again. And just all of that's really exciting. And if you can't afford it, then what? That's no use to you.
What's the point? Exactly.
Right.
I can totally relate to this. And actually, being old school, of course, I like knobs. I like switches. I never got excited about VSDs, but that's my personal opinion. And I think VSDs are great because obviously they come cheap, and so people have a chance to learn. But the real experience is when you turn a knob, right? It's a tactile feeling and a switch, and it makes a noise and so on. I think there's a hugely emotional aspect to all of these instruments, and the hardware itself, I believe, is a very important part of it.
Yeah, there's a performance aspect
That too.
grabbing a control. And Brendan, I know you're big into how many synthesizers? 100 synthesizers in your studio?
About 140.
140.
Oh,
So obviously you're
How big
well.
is your house?
It's cramped.
About 140 synthesis.
You must have a very tolerant wife.
Well, yeah, very tolerant. Thank you.
But I know that's an important aspect for you as well, because a lot of those are grab it and make the changes.
I have every shape and size, and the way I work is I have them around the room, kind of like a showroom. They're up on the walls like a
Right.
slat wall. And then I just bring a couple over to a 2-tier stand next to my console that I use on occasion. Then I'll put those back and bring 2 more over.
I was just about to ask, do you actually play them all?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's cool.
Absolutely. And I just go through them, and there's something special about it. Doesn't necessarily have to be analog, but having all the knobs and laid out in front of you, it's just a totally different experience.
So do you have a kind of a list as you give them the same amount of attention? So
No, I'm sure there's some that are jealous of the others. Yeah, everybody has their favorites, but
I like that because I see a
But I
lot
try
of
to use
people
everything.
collect them, but then actually they just collect dust.
right.
It becomes more like a status symbol than
Right.
actually. Glad to hear it.
Speaking of the electronics and analog and digital and things, you have actually basically built a city in China, and you've been living there for how long now?
Well, city is a little bit exaggerated. It's a beautiful factory. I live there. I've been living there with some gaps in between. I live there now. Again, I was raised as a musician engineer, and what we do right now, we completely automate the factory. We reinvent the factory, putting the latest automation in there. And I like manufacturing. I walk the shop floor 3 times a day. I like to be hands-on, and something that I always enjoy, right? Seeing the products being built, and now the latest aspect of automating the factory to a point. It's called a light-out factory. Basically, there's no people in it anymore. AGVs, robots, and so on. And that's one of the things on my bucket list I want to achieve in my life, to drive a factory that's state-of-the-art.
So I'm curious, with all of the products you developed, of course, the synthesizers are at the forefront. You've been releasing these lately, but of course the digital mixer area is also an area where you really have jumped to the fore with the X series and with the Wing and all of those. Does that go back to your recording engineer passions?
Honestly, I'm extremely proud of a team that I have in Germany. They have been designing those products. They've been with me for nearly 30 years now. It's the same team. It's basically a handful of geniuses, passionate, beyond passionate. And they developed the X series, the Wing series now. And all I do is I try to support them whatever they need. I'm immensely proud of them. As you know, the X series has become the most successful digital mixer of all times by 100 miles.
Right.
We sold close to 1 million digital mixers. Wow. And believe it or not, we are selling more X32s today than when we started 12 years ago.
That's incredible.
I believe it's fair to say it's an industry standard.
Absolutely.
And more to come. And I take no credit in all of this. All the credit it goes to the engineers and the people who designed this. I think Jan was here some time ago, Jan Duwe. I'm extremely proud of these people.
Yeah.
And more to come.
Wow, that's awesome.
What's coming after the launch of the Wing Compact, Wing Rack will be mind-blowing.
Oh, fantastic. And what about future plans for synthesizers? Are there more of those? Can we look forward to more happening in that area as well?
What do you think?
I think probably so.
I will build synthesizer to the last day.
Yeah.
It's my passion. It's our passion. And as I said, I'm proud to be nuts.
So I'm curious, you've mentioned that a number of times, the idea of passion. Does that passion for the synthesizer come from the music you were listening to, from the sounds you could get from it? What is your infatuation with synthesizers?
That's interesting. So when I was 16, a friend of mine invited me to a jazz festival in Montreux. I was 16 or 17. Al Jarreau was there, Randy Crawford, Brecker Brothers, Larry Carlton, Lee Rittenauer, name it. And I was a kid, I had no idea about jazz. And I'll tell you a funny story. So Al Jarreau started to sing Take 5. And there was a lady next to me, whipped up her blouse and said, "Al, I love you." And I was a kid then. I said, "Must be cool to be a musician." And that was the time then I started to listen to Oscar Peterson, Monty Alexander, George Shearing, and all these guys. And I started to play jazz. And obviously all the synthesizers, were born at that age. And it was such a fascinating time. And I think that's I guess where
Yeah.
all this passion comes from.
Were there particular synthesis that you were looking up to with those sounds and with that playing? Was it Joe Zawinul, you know, I mean, the guys who were really active at that time?
I think it was just the sound that engraved in my brain and my heart, and every time you play the synthesizer, you know, you discover new sounds, right? And the PPG came out, which was a complete different experience, and I just couldn't get enough, right? Mm-hmm. Again, to this day, that the guy said, just get out of my shop, right? But I think it's a bug. Once the bug, gets you, then it's over, right? Mm-hmm. I think you feel the same, isn't it?
Made a career out of it.
Yeah, I think I greatly annoyed my mom or dad when I was just constantly playing, and headphones was not so big thing. I had speakers there, and so actually my dad, when he built this organ, which was in the attic of our house, on Sundays he would basically give it all, right, pedal to the metal. And he was entertaining our neighbors, whether they liked it or not. Said, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. So I was playing my synthesizers.
I'm trying to picture in my mind 1,200 pipes, and we know how big some of the bass pipes are in the foot pedals of these. That had to be like resonating the whole...
Oh man, I tell you, we probably got cracks in the wall. Definitely, I think we lost the friendship of some neighbors, I would think. But what really inspired me was the passion my dad had for this organ. Mm-hmm. And we're all products of our parents, aren't we? And I think that was the moment where he induced that passion in me. And again, being able to help him along the way, I think that's who I am today.
Well, that actually brings up another important thing I wanted to discuss with you, and that is the Uli Behringer Foundation.
Right.
And giving back and supporting that passion in others as well. Tell us about that and where that came from and what you're doing with that.
I think the biggest inspiration in my life was my mom. She passed 2 years ago, and she was so supportive. I can tell you a story where I just started my little company and in Germany, and we had an option for a land, so I want to build my first office, right, in my factory. So all along, the bank always said, Mr. Behringer, we appreciate you as a loyal customer. If you ever need money, please come and visit us. So the time came, I had an option to buy that land, put my Sunday suit on, and then the guy said, well, tell me about your plan. I said, I want to build this little factory and the office. I need some money. Mm-hmm. And then they looked at me and said, well, we want to accompany you on your future path. But we don't believe in you, or we don't want to give you the money. And I walked out. I was literally in tears. I was so disappointed, and I was sad. And I told the story to my mom, and she said, don't worry, I'll pledge my house for you.
Wow.
She pledged her house for me. A day later, I walked into another bank. They said, no problem, here's the loan. And I will never forget this, right? These are the moments where you understand the difference in your life, right? And later on, when I went to Germany, my parents went through a rough time. She said, here's 20,000 Swiss francs, around about $20,000. That's all I have. Please take that money and hope that helps you study, right? And I never wanted to touch that money. So I played in piano bars, weddings, and all kinds of stuff. I never touched the money, and years later, I gave it back to her. I said, I appreciate it, but I wanted to do this on my own. But just the support I got from my mother was something I will never forget, mm-hmm. Right? And she was always very proud of me. To the last day, I tried to explain what we're doing, and she was very happy. She came to the factory in China, walked the production line, took a screwdriver. At the age of 50, she went back to university. She studied psychology, and then worked for an institution called the Helping Hand, where people call in when they're distressed or suicidal. So she did this pro bono, and later on did hospice. At some point she came to me and said, you know what, I want to share something with you. The experience I have gained in the hospital, people die in two different ways. One is they had a disgruntled or had a life that is not fulfilled. They feel like there's some unfinished business. And she said people don't die in a very, very easy way because they always feel there's something left to do, but obviously they realize now it's too late, right? And then there are people who have a fulfilled life. They experience love, they could live their passion. Of course, nothing is ever great, right? But they had a pretty good life. And she said they put the head on the pillow and often go with a smile. And then she looked at me and said, which of those two you want to be? So it really helped me to understand that follow your passion, follow the things you love to do, because you never know when it's too late, right? Towards the end of her life, she had saved a lot of money. She sold the house that she lived in and said, here's the money, please take it, right? And I said, I don't want it. And I said, what would make you happy? And she gave it away for scholarships, the university in Switzerland, to help people that are less fortunate. It really touched me. So now that I'm getting older, I decided I want to step into the footsteps of my mom. So I donated the whole company, my personal assets, into a foundation. It's called the Uli Behringer Foundation. And so personally, technically, I don't own anything anymore, which is a great relief, because you need to make sure there's a succession planning. But I'm also, as a minimalist myself, I feel a great sense of relief. But part of the foundation is that we give back to people who are less fortunate. I always say there's a musician in every human being. We want to empower the ones who have not and cannot. So last year we donated $1 million to playingforchange.org, which is an organization that helps people, the kids around the world, to have access to musical education, to equipment. We want to make sure that we give part of the profit that we earn back to society, and in honor of my mom.
What an inspiring story. Yeah, fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Love to hear that. Giving back is always, of course, it's a passion of ours here at Sweetwater as well, and so we love having partners that are doing similar things and in a big way as you are.
I think it's part of our obligation.
Right. Yeah, fantastic. So, Brendan, I asked Daniel, I'll ask you as well, what have you always wanted to ask Uli?
Why don't you start making synths sooner?
I'm deeply sorry. It is what it is. So what I'm trying to do now is catch up, make up for the lost time. So hopefully, what's your favorite synth?
It's really hard to say one favorite. It's like children, you know, you can't just
You'll
pick
be careful.
one. But obviously the Oberheim OB8, I have an original. That's one of my favorites.
Right.
Of yours, I really like the MS-101 or
Okay.
MS-1. That thing's phenomenal. Mini Moog is a classic and
Absolutely.
great sounding synth. A lot of favorites. I had a similar experience. I went down to the local music store when I was a kid,
Right.
but instead of kicking me out, they put me to work.
Okay.
And I've been in the business ever since.
That's a better outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Mine was always the Solina, and I don't know why it is. There's something about that instrument that is just mesmerizing, right?
It's the
You can't
ensemble.
exactly, but you can't get enough of it, right?
Right.
And you can't emulate it in a digital manner. You can't.
My dad used to take me to those silly, even though he didn't believe in it, we went and saw all those Chariots of the Gods and the UFO movies in
Right,
the
right.
70s. And always there was a Solina in the background with a phase shifter. And so I associate like all of the excitement of, you know, UFOs and outer space and Bermuda Triangle and all that. And all while like hearing the Solina strings in the background with that ensemble. So I love that sound.
And you love Supertramp, right? We figured that out.
I
We
do.
We
and
both
Pink Floyd.
And they
and-
use that stuff too,
Absolutely.
right?
You know, and the first time I remember I was on a bus in mid 70s and someone just said, here, listen to this, and put Jean-Michel Jarre Oxygen on.
Right,
and
right.
Like I had no idea that it existed. And it's like, I need more of this, exactly that, you know.
Actually, in order to make all these synths, we had to rebuild a lot of the old semiconductors. Right? You can't buy them, PBDs, you can't buy them really anymore, and all the VCOs and VCFs. And the magic is really in those components, right? Unless you really built them or rebuilt them, you will never get that sound. So we invested a lot of money in rebuilding these chips. We have a company called Cool Audio, which actually is dedicated to making semiconductors. And if you put all the commercial aspects to it, it's basically crazy to do this, right? but there's a say that passion is the essence of life because it makes you do things any rational person would never do. And I think that's the best definition I heard about passion.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Daniel's office is next to mine, and it's not uncommon for him to burst through the door saying, "You got to come and check this out." And you've done that several times with Uli synths. Which is your favorite?
The most recent, just the UBXA, just having 16 voices. Back when you couldn't have too many analog voices because it was too expensive,
Right.
I would say, you know what? If you need more than 5 voices, you're not arranging very well. I said, listen to a Steely Dan song. Nobody's playing 16-note chords. You know, it's very well arranged. But then, when you actually have the luxury of having 16 pairs of analog oscillators, it has to do with just the little bit that trails on in the end. And if you're running an arpeggiator,
Right.
and then all of a sudden you just bring the release up, and those old voices are just coming.
Yep.
Or you layer them, right?
Yeah, right. And yeah, and of course a layer. You know, people are like, "Why does a synth have to have 256 voices?" It's like, man, you layer 8 layers, and you're going to get voice stealing.
And all 16 work every time you turn it on, unlike a real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can tell you, I mean, that's a labor of love. Our UK team, Italian team, been working on this for literally 5 years. And to get the essence out of, of the whole circuitry, I'm really, really proud to say we really, really replicated that circuitry, that sound. And we had like 20 beta testers who had the original, and we didn't let go until that thing was perfect. Again, you put a commercial number to this, it's crazy, right? We should never have done this. But this is one of the synths that I loved when I grew up, and I just had to do it. It's nice to see when people appreciate it, play music, and then you listen to the customers when they publish the music and say, it was worth it.
I know a lot of friends and fans who would want me to say, Matrix Expander.
I'd second that.
We hear you. We hear you.
Where do the ideas for the synthesizers that you've done come from? Do you drive those, or how do you choose what's going to be next?
That's a very, very good question. We believe that the customer is everything, like Sweetwater, right? We're both customer obsessed. We literally are. So we communicate constantly on Facebook and other social media pages and ask customers, what do you want, right? We have a very simple say. It doesn't matter what we think. You tell us what we should build. And there's basically literally rankings where people said, well, it's a poll, which one we should do first. And that's basically it, right? And in many cases, as we say, even if we sell only a few, it doesn't matter. We have not invented synthesizers, nor will we ever claim, but hopefully people will remember us for having brought all these jewels back to life.
Right.
Right? Because right now, how much would this stuff cost? I mean, you must have invested
Oh yeah, lots.
a fortune.
Yeah.
But then only a few people can afford those, and I think it's important to make them available, accessible to people who do not have deep pockets. Right? And I think that's something we strongly feel about. And that's the purpose why we exist.
Right. Well, that's been your philosophy for forever, I guess. And I remember the motto, twice as many features at half the cost was it. And giving access to customers, clearly that these kinds of instruments to your customers, clearly that also feeds your passion. It makes you excited. I mean, it's fun to watch how excited you get about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you have to have a purpose. You need to have a reason to get up. And it can't be money. It can't be business. I don't care. Right? It's about doing something for customers. And if you do that, and you know this very well, then people will reward you, right? Profit and money and all this stuff is a consequence, but it's not a purpose.
Right.
And we have a very simple say that the way we price our products is that we look at the cost and we add a small profit on top of it, and that's the sales price. So we don't go out like most competitors said, how much could I charge and get away with it? We say it doesn't matter. We just take the cost, add a small margin, and that's the sale price. Customers will appreciate it, and you have a long-term or a lifetime customer, and that's what matters.
That's what we're all about, right?
You mentioned accessibility with these instruments. You know, I always remind people, because I teach a lot of students,
Right.
and I always explain the synthesizer was never meant to be a keyboard instrument. It is an instrument, and keyboard is one of the many controllers you could put to it.
Right.
But unfortunately, from the day that the mini mode came out, like all of a sudden, everyone thought you had to be a piano player. You know, you take an instrument like the System 55, or, you know, especially the 2600, it's like anybody who has an opinion about sound can enjoy playing with these instruments. You don't have to be classically trained, you know? And so part of the price coming down, I really believe it lets people who otherwise couldn't justify it. Well, I could buy this synth if I had gigs 5 times a week, or if I was in a studio, or this or that. But it's like, these are low enough price. Get a synth just because it's really fun to have a synth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the joy to explore. You connect something here, right? And it does something else. And you don't have a patch. So later on, right, you know that it's a snapshot of a sound you may never get back. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole different experience than just recalling a preset at times, right? I talk a lot to customers, and they share that with me and said, actually, they don't want to have patch memory for exactly that reason, because they know it's a momentum, they enjoy that sound, and then tomorrow something different.
But always get a high-res recording of it, just in case you want to use it later.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating, and fascinating also for me to see how young people now rediscover this, right? And how they use these synths in a very different manner, right? And how they start to explore the gift of music, and through that then start to play other instruments or try other synthesizers, and hopefully, you know, have a lifelong relationship with music.
Yeah, fantastic.
And that, to me, bringing these synths to children is something that I feel very passionate about. As you know, we have synthesizers starting at $49, right? And my goal is to make synthesizers for $9.90, so we can make these accessible to kids in poor countries, right? And not just a VST, but actually a little hardware device you can put in your headphone, as long as you possibly can go, right? We're looking at the next synthesizer for $9.99 and potentially give them away for free, as we have done before. We donated the 1,500 synthesizers, and actually try to figure out where the areas are where people never get anything. So we spent the year figuring out the most rural areas around the world, from Nepal to Latin America. We made it a point to find out where these little schools and orphanages are. And it was a great experience when you see the videos that come back and the pictures that come back with smiling kids. That's something I want to do for the rest of my life.
Right. Really awesome. Brendan, final comments or questions?
I just think we're all lucky to have grown up when synthesizers were new.
Right.
I don't know that everybody has that kind of experience when every day there's a song that comes out with a new sound that no one's ever heard before.
And perhaps one more thing, it's fascinating when you see young kids now starting to listen to the 80s music. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
It's the 360 again, and how they get fascinated. The sound was raw, it was not overproduced as it is sometimes today. And I find it wonderful that people start to appreciate the old music, right? I grew up with Manhattan Transfer and with Earth, Wind and Fire and that stuff, and to this day I just love that stuff, right? And hopefully that music has some form of a comeback together with the synthesizer sounds.
Right. Final thoughts, comments, questions?
Just can't wait to see what's next. Right now I have an MS5 in my office, and each time I decide, okay, I'm going to leave this because I'm going to roll on this, and then I do something, it's like, it's even better. Okay, I'm going to roll on this. But that is a really fun synth. A friend of mine has the original, and the sliders have all worn out and everything's going bad, and so it was really something to play a new one of those.
It was very difficult to design that product because it uses mostly discrete components. It's a high impedance design, so it's very difficult to lay out the PCB. because there's a lot of interference. So we have probably 12 or 15 board spins, and always comparing it with the original. Yeah, since you mentioned it, head scratcher.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sitting down with us today. I want to put big controversy to rest. I've heard it said one way in the room. I usually say it the German way. I've heard how you say it. What is the proper way to say your last name?
Just call me Uli.
Uli. You're not going to give it away, are you?
No, I don't care. I don't care. As long as you spell my name right.
There you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you for supporting us and supporting me. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Great to see you.
We're in a mission here. I will not stop until my last breath.
Well, I think that says it all, and we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for joining us today. Daniel Fisher, Brendan Murphy, Uli Behringer or Behringer, whichever way you
choose.
And I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks.
Cheers.